Hello, I'm Caroline Robertson from ActifHR. I qualified as a solicitor over 20 years ago and provide consultancy to business. We are based at Silverstone Circuit and provide employers with employment law and human resource support and guidance to cover what I call the 3 R's. This is recruit, retain and release. What I mean by recruit, we are not recruitment consultants. We assist with the interview, onboarding and all the employee documentation you need, such as contracts of employment and policies. Retain, we cover the employee management process from performance, sickness, training, disciplinaries, redundancy and consultations. And release, of course, this deals with any part of the exit process that we need to cover, including settlement agreements. I realise that a number of businesses have been working remotely during the pandemic, and many have found it's been working well. Some of my clients are going to continue operating hybrid working of a few days in the office and some days working from home. I will be looking at some of the key human resource factors to consider, including 5 ways to enable remote working, onboarding, homework risk assessments, and then we'll briefly touch on the general data protection regulations and what to consider. And I'm just going to share my screen. And as you can see, that's sort of outline it, and I'm intending it to be about 10 or so minutes, just running through those key tips for you. So 5 ways to enable remote onboarding. There has been a further delay in terms of in-person checks of the right to work checks, which have been welcomed by businesses. The temporary measure put in place by the Home Office at the start of the pandemic to support businesses to work remotely will now be extended until the end of August. Employers will need to resume in-person checks from the 1st of September. This is the second time the reintroduction of in-person checks to new employees has been pushed back. The in-person checks, it was seen as an opportunity by businesses to fully review all their recruitment practices, including the questions at the screening stage to the wording in offer letters and employment contracts. And onboarding in a virtual environment, I know, is very challenging, and I'm working with lots of businesses who are operating with the hybrid working, and they find that onboarding remotely is much harder. The key thing, it's worth investing the time to review your processes and create good quality templates and put in place processes to make the onboarding experience better thought out and rewarding. Some statistics: 1/3 of employees leave their job within the first 6 months. The decision about how long to stay with a business is made within the first 2 weeks. And so organisations with strong onboarding processes can increase retention by 82%. And one of the top reasons people leave or give for leaving early is an onboarding process which was not structured or well done. So clear, this is a cost-benefit argument for doing it well and retaining staff. And in the old days, people thought onboarding was basically about induction, and it's more than that now. I say there's 5 key ways, and I call them operational, knowledge, performance, talent, and social. So we used to just think of onboarding as operational. This was the checklist items: equipment, have we got the right equipment, employment contract documents, policies, logistics, desk, seating. But it's worth also thinking of what pre-boarding you can do before they start. Employees are often serving out their notice periods. They're keen to learn about your business. Can you send out contracts, NDAs, policies before they start? This should be a slick process, and it doesn't just sit with HR. To ensure your line managers can put this in place and are trained to do so to get this right. And if it's not right, it's often very disengaging for employees. In terms of knowledge, again, you often have policies, procedures, ways of working, information to give to the employee. What could we send as a pre-boarding information? Some clients I deal with send bite-sized video clips of information, which is good, rather than endless documents, which can sometimes be a bit overwhelming. Technology can allow you to do this as pre-boarding with learning platforms for employees to work through. Then we turn to performance. This is key to help the employee understand the purpose of the role. Do you have job descriptions? Have you set out SMART objectives for the role? Many new employees are highly motivated and happy to receive objectives. I'll just stop sharing my screen for the moment. And they're happy to receive objectives. Often it's very good to give people something useful to do, which they can get on with themselves. It makes them feel as if they can make a contribution from day one as part of perhaps pre-boarding. It may mean you need to upskill your managers. In the UK, we have never been great at training our managers, and it's important to train them on how to set good quality objectives, especially if they're remote working. How can we measure those objectives? It's measured on output, perhaps, rather than what we used to do in the olden days was just how much time was spent at your desk. So the third one is talent. I'm conscious we're recruiting people, we think because they're great. We need to think about what their skills are. Is there a way to make this visible, trying to make their talent much more visible? The worry of remote working is that we don't realise what skills our employees might have. Have you got any systems in place to perhaps capture this, to make it visible? I think Office 365, there may be something called Microsoft Delve, which is a way to communicate people's skills. When you've got someone new coming in, trying to get them to showcase something, you may want to consider an informal get-together, that they make an informal presentation on an area which is their expertise, and it allows them to feel they can contribute to the business. It makes them feel they've got something to give, that they're doing something right from day one. They're showing their expertise on a particular area to maybe inform their other members of staff. And social, can you get them to join a social lunch or coffee even before they start? A client of mine does a great thing when they get people to fill out a form to ask them what their hobbies are, football team, what they like to do. Can they be part of something before they join a WhatsApp group so they feel part of the organisation? Or perhaps buddy them with a co-worker. Often an employee may not want to bother their boss, whoever, even if he has an open door policy and is very friendly, but they might not want to bother the boss with obvious questions. If they were in the office, they could ask the colleague that they sit next to. So perhaps by buddying them up with somebody from day one allows them to have somebody they can ask those questions to and get to know. And don't forget, onboarding also applies to new role onboarding. When we promote a manager, or if we move an employee to a different department, the onboarding of this helps enormously to how that employee can hit the ground running when they move. So essentially, when I'm going to share my screen again back to where we got to. So looking at our home working risk assessments and considerations, we often are thinking now that perhaps you might be doing this already, but you need to consider whether we put in place some kind of risk assessment form. And it doesn't need to be complicated. It can be a one-page form, but it sets out all various different areas which we need to consider and think about when we have our employees working from home. I've just listed some key areas. It's the equipment. Have they got the right desk? Have they got the right seating? Have they got a quiet space to work in? Is it the temperature right? Do they have other family members that are wandering in and out? Just to see where their workspace is, that it's private, and have they got shredding facilities for paper copies? Of course, IT security, we might want to consider a password policy. You might have that in place already. The ICO also, which is the Information Commissioner's Office, does have guidance on a bring your own device. So if employees are using their own devices, we'd always recommend you give them a company laptop or company phones. But if they do bring their own devices, there is guidance on the ICO website about this. Of course, if they're remote working, we need to make sure that they update their software programs, that they make sure that they do that on a regular basis. And people who are remote working often keep pressing the delay button, keep pressing stop on that and don't update. So we might need to have some guidance about that. Insurance. Some insurances will ask that if the employee actually tells their insurer that they're working from home, so you might need to check that. Hours of work, I'm conscious that we are becoming much more of a culture where with remote working, people are working and the work's going on into the evenings. If you're a company that sends emails out of office hours and that's your culture and employees respond to it, that may have worked for a period of time, for a short-term period of time. It might be employees are very comfortable to do that. However, equally, we are finding that employees are feeling that their day never seems to end. There doesn't seem to be a cut-off, that perhaps they're checking their emails late in the evening, and that's the culture of the business. Perhaps if that's what we are doing, we may need to consider about our employees' well-being, whether that's the right thing to be doing, and whether we need to put some guidance in place to managers about the hours people work, or it may be decided that people are very happy with extending their hours and having more flexibility in the day, dealing with childcare arrangements or whatever they are that they go off and do. Of course, in terms of dealing with performance, how we measure the performance. And if we have companies are putting in place any kind of software programs to measure performance, we need to be clear on the face of it that we've got those software programs going in and make sure that our employees know that they could be monitored. Looking at expenses, do we make a contribution to any of their broadband expenses or heating or lighting? I know HMRC allows £6 a week, I think, clawback in terms of expenses, which an employee can take in terms of tax. Of course, health and safety, we'll be looking at where they sit in terms of the chair so that they don't end up with back problems. Sometimes I'm finding employees are working at the kitchen table, sitting on a kitchen chair, and they're having problems working there for many hours during the week. And that's all part of our employee engagement, having a consultation with our employees to make sure that if they are going to be continuing to remote work or even hybrid work of 2 or 3 days working from home, that we have gone through that checklist with them. We're finding that actually there's some cases coming through from Europe, from France and Ireland about the right to log off. And that's been quite interesting, even though we're not part of the EU anymore, that it'll be persuasive. It'll be something that perhaps may come into England. And it's a hot topic that's being discussed about whether employees potentially have a right to log off and whether that should be enshrined in legislation. It's not something that currently is. And of course, all of this is part of in employee well-being, and that's been a very hot topic during the whole of the COVID remote working pandemic. And if I know that the STC, Source and Technology Cluster, ran a very informative webinar on the corporate social responsibility, CSR, and employee well-being and employee engagement, and how you deal with employees in the workplace is one of the 4 pillars of CSR. And I've noticed a lot more companies have actually having CSR tabs on their website, so it's clearly a growing area, an important area, and that's one of the things you can check off on the checklist of CSR. So really, we're looking at having a remote working policy in place, and that again sets out guidance, and so it's clear to employees what the expectations are in terms of their working space, how they use it, the hours that they work, and the equipment that they're using. Again, ActifHR, we can provide a home working policy for a fee of £60, as well as a home working risk assessment form, again for a fee of £60 for a period of time until probably I'd say over July and August 2021, we can provide that as fixed prices. So moving on to the general data protection regulations, GDPR, of course, which came in 2018, it overlaps with HR and working from home. Even though some of it comes out of Europe, we're keeping GDPR and we're waiting regulations about sharing data from Europe. And talking about personal data, most company data is not covered by GDPR. It covers, however, company email addresses and any other personal information. It can cover IP addresses, data, perhaps if you're tracking people's travel expenses, cookies, bank details, employee monitoring at work systems. If staff are working on sensitive personal data, which is medical, mental health records, cultural identity, you need an extra layer of protection if they're using their home Wi-Fi. So you should limit the amount of data you collect and the length of time you keep it. So recruitment data, you might just be asking, you must make sure you only ask for relevant information. So we don't need to ask for marital status anymore. And we get rid of recruitment data that employees that we aren't taking on, we can shred that really at the end of the recruitment process or within 2 or 3 months. If you use certain software platforms such as Dropbox, these are US based. As far as GDPR is concerned, these platforms are not based in the UK, and such cloud-based software systems, they transfer data from the UK to the US. All organizations have data processing agreements, so you can actually Google those and download those data processing agreements for your company. You can download them, sign it, save it on your system. If you use those software, so you've got a record of that. I'm aware if any employees are home working, if you have any hard copies, they may not have secure shredding facilities. Also, employees may store things on their laptops, and it's careful if they're using home laptops, but you need to put in place a system where personal data is deleted and not kept for too long. Equally, you need to put in a system that any company data, how that's stored up, of course, on if they're using their personal laptops and where it's safe to store that. So under GDPR, there is something called the lawful basis of processing. There's 6 lawful bases of processing. For example, one is consent, and one is that you're working under a contract. And to be GDPR compliant, you're expected to have a register of personal data. And essentially, this is a spreadsheet listing categories of personal data, how you process it, and the lawful basis of processing, how long you're going to keep it for, and the security measures you have in place. So the key things with GDPR and working from home and remote working is that you have a privacy policy. This should be on your website. If you're remote working, you need to update your privacy policy. The ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, you may need to register with them, and the registration is £40 a year. And if you have you should have a spreadsheet of personal data and how you process and store this, and a data protection policy for your employees. And again, this is something I can help with, we can help with. It doesn't need to be an overcomplicated process, but you should have those in place. So I'm conscious there's quite a lot to take in. Thank you very much for listening in, and thank you for watching this. And of course, if we can help you in any way, then please feel free. My email address doesn't appear on the screen behind me, but it's caroline.robertson@actifhr.co.uk. Thanks then. Bye.